Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
I heard the door click open before I saw him. Heavy paws thudded against the floor, sending a chill through me. My worst fear had entered my home. Deborah, we're here. Griselda's voice carried into the room, cheerful and sharp. My hands trembled as I lowered my mug. Bruiser's panting echoed through the house, the massive bull terrier looming into view, larger and more intimidating than I remembered. Philip. I called out, but my husband was upstairs, out of earshot. I was alone with them. Griselda strolled in, unfazed by my fear, as Bruiser circled the room. Isn't he just the most handsome boy? She cooed, settling into my favorite chair. Griselda, I managed, trying to steady my voice. You didn't tell me you were bringing Bruiser. She barely glanced at me, dismissing my words with a wave of her hand. Oh, Deborah, really? You need to face your fear. Bruiser's a good boy. He shouldn't be here. I insisted, panic creeping into my voice. You know how I feel about dogs. Her smile was cold. Don't be ridiculous. You've been coddling this fear long enough. I backed against the kitchen counter, helpless as Bruiser claimed the couch, his claws scratching the fabric. Philip. I shouted, desperation rising. Philip appeared, his face neutral. What's going on? I told you I don't want Bruiser here, I said, my voice breaking. You know why. Deb, you're overreacting, he said, shaking his head. It's just a dog. Overreacting. Philip, I was attacked, you promised. Deborah. Griselda interrupted, her voice laced with condescension. You married Philip. That means you're part of our family now, and so is Bruiser. I turned to Philip, pleading. Philip, please, say something. He sighed. Mom's right. You need to try. He's not going to hurt you. My heart sank. Just a dog? I whispered, feeling the weight of betrayal. Griselda stood, brushing off her coat. I'll be back tomorrow. It's time you stop living in fear, Deborah. And as Bruiser settled in, I realized this was just the beginning. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of nails tapping against the wooden floor. My stomach clenched with dread. Bruiser was here again. I pulled myself from bed and crept downstairs, hoping I was wrong, hoping somehow that yesterday had been an anomaly. But no. There he was sprawled across the living room rug, his massive body occupying more space than seemed reasonable for a dog. Griselda stood by the window, sipping her tea as if she owned the place. Good morning, Deborah, she called out cheerfully. I brought Bruiser over again. He seemed to like it here. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my voice steady. Griselda, we need to talk. She turned, one eyebrow raised in mock concern. About what, dear? I didn't agree to this, I said, pointing at Bruiser, who was now gnawing on a bone, leaving bits of slobber and fragments all over the rug. He shouldn't be here every day. Griselda smiled, as if I were a child complaining about spilled milk. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's good for you, facing your fears. Plus, Bruiser enjoys the company, don't you, boy? She cooed at the dog, who responded with a wag of his tail, utterly oblivious to the tension. I stood there, my hands shaking. This is my home too. I need to feel safe here. Her smile faded into something colder. Safe from Bruiser? He's just a dog, Deborah. You're being irrational. Before I could respond, Philip walked into the room, still groggy from sleep. What's going on? I turned to him, hoping for some support, some sign that he was on my side. Philip, your mother brought Bruiser again. We've talked about this. He glanced at his mother, who smiled sweetly at him, and then at me, looking annoyed. Deborah, it's not a big deal. It's just a few hours. Mom's helping us out by walking him. Helping us? I asked, incredulous. By forcing me to confront a fear I've had since childhood. By bringing her dog here without asking. Deb, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I really think you're overreacting. Bruiser's harmless. Mom's only trying to help. I stared at him, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment. I'm not overreacting, Philip. I don't feel comfortable with him here every day. Griselda interrupted with a laugh that sounded more like a sneer. Comfortable? My dear, no one grows in their comfort zone. You've been too comfortable for too long. It's time to get over this silly dog phobia. I turned to Philip, my voice low but firm. You promised me, Philip. You promised that you wouldn't let this happen. I trusted you. For a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe? But it vanished as quickly as it came. He sighed. Mom's here to help. I can't ask her to leave just because you're uncomfortable. I stared at him, feeling the gap between us widen. Right. Because her feelings matter more than mine. Griselda's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Well, Philip, I think it's clear that Deborah needs more time to adjust. I'll make sure to bring Bruiser by tomorrow for another visit. She'll get used to him eventually. I felt my breath catch. Tomorrow? Of course, Griselda said lightly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Bruiser needs his exercise, and what better place than here? Plus, Philip's busy at work, and I have the time. Before I could respond, Griselda picked up her purse and whistled for Bruiser, who trotted to her side with that stupid wagging tail of his. Come on, boy. Let's give Deborah some time to prepare for tomorrow. She left with a saccharine smile, leaving me standing there stunned. Philip, to my disbelief, simply shrugged and headed into the kitchen. I felt like I was sinking, swallowed by the growing divide between us. I followed Philip, my voice a fragile whisper. You're really going to let her do this? Day after day. He turned, frustration flashing in his eyes. Deborah, what do you want me to do? It's just a dog. Can't you try for once to meet us halfway? I swallowed hard, feeling the sting of his words. Meet you halfway? I've been trying for months to make this work. But this is too much. Maybe it's time you stopped letting one bad experience control your entire life. He shot back, the words landing like blows. Bruiser's not going anywhere. You're going to have to learn to deal with it. I couldn't find the words. There was nothing left to say. Bruiser wasn't the only thing invading my life. Griselda had found her way in, and Philip had handed her the keys. It didn't take long for the cracks in my marriage to widen. The tension in the house was suffocating, the silence between Philip and me growing louder with each passing day. Every interaction felt rehearsed, a routine we both followed because the alternative, confrontation, was too exhausting. But underneath it all, the resentment festered. I started spending more time away from home, working late or finding excuses to avoid the inevitable encounters with Griselda and her dog. But I couldn't escape forever. One evening, I came home to find Griselda's car parked out front again. My heart sank. When I entered the house, there was Bruiser lounging comfortably on the couch, his bulk sprawled across the cushions. I felt a rush of anger. Griselda was in the kitchen, sipping wine with Philip. She looked up and greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're home late again, Deborah, she said casually, her tone dripping with feigned concern. I was beginning to think you were avoiding us. I ignored her and turned to Philip. We need to talk. Philip set down his glass, looking weary. Now? Yes, now, I insisted, my voice sharper than I intended. I can't keep doing this, Philip. I'm at my breaking point. Griselda took a slow sip of her wine, clearly enjoying the tension. Oh dear, what's the issue now? Is it still about Bruiser? I glared at her, then turned back to Philip. You promised we would discuss this. You said you'd talk to her about Bruiser, about respecting my boundaries. Philip sighed heavily. Deborah, this again? I thought we were past it. Past it? I'm supposed to just get over it while she walks all over me? You promised me something would change, and nothing has. Griselda chuckled softly. Darling, you're being dramatic. It's just a dog. You really need to get some perspective. Enough, Griselda, I snapped, my patience gone. This is between me and Philip. But Philip didn't defend me. Instead, he rubbed his temples as if I were the problem. Deborah, you're making this into something bigger than it is. My mother isn't going anywhere, and neither is Bruiser. Can't you see you're pushing us all away? I felt a cold pit forming in my stomach. Us? Philip, there is no us anymore. You've chosen your mother over me at every turn. This isn't about a dog. It's about respect, about you valuing me in this marriage. Griselda's voice slithered through the silence. Marriage is about compromise, dear. Perhaps you should learn that. I turned to her, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Compromise? This isn't compromise. This is manipulation, and you know it. You've been testing me since the day you brought that dog into this house. Philip stood up, frustration evident in his every movement. Enough, Deborah. I can't take this constant fighting. You need to stop making my mother the enemy. She's not the enemy, Philip. You are. You've let this happen. You've allowed her to drive a wedge between us. and now you're blaming me for it." Philip looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I just want peace, Deb. Why can't you understand that?" "Because peace shouldn't come at the cost of my sanity, Philip. I can't do this anymore. I won't live like this, constantly fighting for space in my own life." Griselda smirked, her victory clear in her expression. "Maybe it's time to reconsider what you really want, Deborah. It seems like this situation isn't working for you." Her words hit harder than I expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't working. I stared at Philip, hoping for some sign that he would fight for us, that he would finally stand up to her. But all I saw was a man too tired to care, too loyal to his mother to see the damage being done. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, the words spilling out before I had a chance to stop them. "I can't live like this, Philip. If you won't listen to me, if you won't take my side, then maybe we shouldn't be together." The room fell silent. Griselda's smile vanished, replaced with a look of triumph, as if this was the outcome she had been hoping for all along. Philip stared at me, stunned, as if he couldn't believe I had finally reached my breaking point. "Deborah, what are you saying?" he asked, his voice softer now, but the damage was already done. "I'm saying that I've had enough," I said, my voice stronger now, steadier. "I can't keep living in a house where my feelings don't matter, where your mother's dog has more rights here than I do." Philip opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. For once, he seemed lost, unsure of what to say. Griselda, however, didn't hesitate. "Well," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "maybe you're right, Deborah. Maybe you're not cut out for this marriage after all. My son deserves someone stronger, someone who isn't crippled by irrational fears." I turned to Philip, searching his face for some sign of defense, some shred of loyalty, but all I saw was resignation. He wasn't going to fight for me. Not against her. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving behind the man I thought I knew, the woman who had destroyed everything, and the dog that had become the symbol of all that was wrong in my life. The war was over, but the damage would last far longer than the battle itself. The door closed behind me with a quiet, final click. The day I filed for divorce was clear in my mind, every detail etched with a strange clarity. It wasn't a dramatic scene with shouting or ultimatums. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. The papers slid across the lawyer's desk, crisp and cold, marking the end of something that had died long before. I felt a weight lift, but it wasn't freedom just yet. That would take time. Philip, as expected, hadn't understood. He'd looked at me with the same confusion he always wore when things went wrong, like a lost child, looking for his mother to tell him what to do. And that's what it always came back to, his mother. Griselda, with her controlling ways, her passive-aggressive comments, and her beloved bruiser, had won. Philip was her pawn, bound to her with an invisible leash that grew tighter every day. I had fought for him, for us, but in the end, he remained exactly what he had always been, a mama's boy. No amount of love or patience could change that. After I left, Philip continued to live in the shadow of his mother, doing everything she thought he should. I heard from mutual friends that he barely even noticed I was gone. The house I once called home became Griselda's domain entirely, with Bruiser always by her side, a constant reminder of her dominance over Philip, and once over me. But fate, as they say, has a way of balancing the scales. One evening, about 6 months after I had moved out, the news reached me. Bruiser had turned on Griselda. Philip had called me, his voice shaking, telling me everything in a rush, as if saying it faster would make it easier to comprehend. "It happened so fast, Deborah," he stammered. "One moment everything was fine, and then Bruiser, he just snapped. He bit her. So badly." Apparently, Griselda had tried to discipline Bruiser, something she rarely did. Perhaps he was just having a bad day, or maybe it was something darker, a lifetime of unchecked aggression that finally boiled over. Either way, Bruiser lashed out, and this time the target was the one person who had always defended him. The bite was vicious. Griselda's arm was nearly torn apart. Philip, terrified and helpless as always, had called an ambulance. Griselda was rushed to the emergency room, her life hanging in the balance. For the next 2 months, the doctors fought for her survival. The infection from the bite worsened, and despite their best efforts, Griselda's condition deteriorated. She was in and out of consciousness, her once dominant presence reduced to frailty. Philip, ever the dutiful son, stayed by her side. But as the days dragged on, it became clear that Griselda's iron grip on life, and on Philip, was slipping. When I heard the news, I felt a strange sense of karmic justice. Griselda, who had tormented me for so long with her manipulations, was now a victim of her own creation. She had turned Bruiser into a weapon, and now that weapon had turned on her. As they say, don't do evil to others. It tends to boomerang back. Philip called me again, weeks later, his voice broken. She's gone, Deborah, he whispered. The infection, it was too much. I don't know what to do. I didn't offer him comfort. He didn't ask for it. There was nothing left to say. Griselda's death wasn't the result of some cosmic punishment, but in my heart it felt like justice. Not because I wished her harm, but because she had set the course of her own downfall long ago. Her need for control, her disregard for anyone else's boundaries, had finally caught up with her. As for Philip, he was lost without her, a man who had never learned to stand on his own 2 feet. He remained tethered to her memory, living in the shell of a life dictated by someone no longer there to pull the strings. I, on the other hand, was free, truly free. And while I carried scars from that marriage, some deeper than others, I walked forward without the weight of Griselda's shadow looming over me.